Hi all, I'm going to have a look now at Ivanchuk versus Karpov in the Linares round 5 of 1991. So Ivanchuk had destroyed Kasparov in round 1 and now he faces the other big K who was FIDE rated 2725 at the time of this game. So Ivanchuk kicked off with d4 and Karpov chose his favourite Nimzo Indian defence, which is one of the most solid defences available to d4. Ivanchuk is not afraid of the main line to play knight c3, allowing the pin. Now he chooses e3, which is the solid Rubenstein variation, considered one of the best replies to bishop b4, although Kasparov seems to be favouring queen c2. Karpov now castled, and after bishop d3, Karpov played d5. So he's got the idea of immediately pressurising the c4 pawn, but after knight f3 he plays c5, so there's a lot of central tension now with these four pawns. So this is quite interesting. Black's standard plan is, I believe, to do what Karpov played, which is taking on d4 and then taking on c4 now, because it leaves white with this isolated d pawn, and many games are decided based on who is doing better from this isolated d pawn. Is it black who's able to blockade on d5 successfully, or is it white who will use the outpost square on e5 effectively to launch a kingside attack or something? In this game it was Ivanchuk's attack which seemed to win through. So let's see how Karpov went wrong in his handling in this game of the isolated queen pawn, which is actually quite unusual for Karpov, I believe. After b6, Ivanchuk played bishop g5, and now Karpov played bishop b7. So it seems intrinsically very logical what Karpov has done, fianchettoing his queen's bishop, eyeing that d5 square. So Ivanchuk now plays rook c1, that's a logical move as well. And after knight c6, white plays a3. So it doesn't just ask the bishop what is it doing there, but also after this bishop retreat, you'll notice that black hasn't got this standard manoeuvre of knight b4 to d5 to blockade the d pawn. White plays queen d3, and one idea of this might be a bishop manoeuvre like this, bishop a2 to b1, a bit crude, but it uses one of the trumps of the isolated pawn to sort of try and get an attack. Karpov now routinely blocks the d pawn, and perhaps this is shown as a mistake, but it really requires a lot of analysis to actually say that for sure. Ivanchuk actually voluntarily gave up his bishop, something he's done earlier in the tournament against Kasparov, giving up bishops for knights. And now let's have a look at this variation first. If bishop takes g5 was played, looking at it with Rybka, after knight takes, which actually threatens mate by the way, so say queen takes here, now f4, Rybka thinks a slight advantage to white. So this slight Zwischenzug move, f4, and now bishop e4, targeting h7. And here's an example variation where white would get a big advantage. So that weakness on the dark squares could be exploited in this variation. And here, this is an example of bad play, it could lead to disaster for black. So I just give that as an example. So maybe bishop takes g5 wasn't that good. So anyway, Karpov played e takes d5, and after bishop takes, knight takes, rook fe1. So white's got an annoying nagging pressure now on this e file, and this knight's kind of passive actually. After rook c8, knight g5 is tempting because, you know, what is black doing about the h7 pawn? I mean, let's have a quick look at that. Knight g5, but maybe knight g6, queen f5, say rook c7, and after g3, queen c8. Maybe this is fine for black, just about. So that nagging edge wouldn't be that significant. So what Ivanchuk does is quite interesting now, quite out of the routine. He plays h4, believe it or not. And this has got quite a cunning positional idea, that this pawn will be useful when it gets to h5. If white ever plays knight e5, and black, in response to that, ever plays f6, then the g6 square would be useful to plant a knight at. So this is quite far ahead, this is kind of planning and provocation if the knight's going to go to e5 later. So this h-pawn could be used positionally as well as maybe tactically for an attack. After h6 he did play h5, so we see this idea now. Just bear in mind this knight manoeuvre idea. You know, assume that this pawn's going to move later, which it did. So after rook c7, knight b5 though, and Ivanchuk doesn't mind this pin on the a6 to f1 diagonal. He just plays a4 here, and after bishop takes, queen takes, white still has this nagging edge. Black's pieces are quite passive, and white's got at the moment occupation of this c-file. This knight's slightly more aggressive than this knight. Karpov plays knight f5, and after g3, knight e7, so it seems as though Karpov's wasted a move. But he has kind of, I suppose, provoked this weakness, but is it really a weakness? Black does seem to be just in a generally very passive position here out of the opening and those exchanges. Knight e5, queen d6, and now queen a6. So white's really dominating this c-file. After knight f5, now knight takes d4 might be threatened. Well, it is actually. So white just dropped the queen back to protect the d4 pawn. And knight e7 again. So as if Karpov's inviting a repetition of moves with queen a6 again. But here Ivanchuk actually played queen f3. So he's keeping an eye on now on this f7 pawn. So the rook can't move so easily. So white's still got the nagging pressure. a5, now king g2. Now finally Karpov is provoked into playing f6. Now Ivanchuk doesn't play knight g6 immediately here. Actually, let's have a quick look. Knight g6 immediately. Maybe takes. And maybe black. Well, Rybko on light analysis thinks f5, but with an advantage to white. This pawn could be dangerous, but it's immediately attacked here. So maybe Ivanchuk wanted to keep the knight for the moment to play knight f4. To play that knight to g6 under a more favourable circumstance. So rook c8 now, rook e1, now rook c4. So the rook is now on c4, attacking these two pawns materialistically, rather than f8. So maybe this is the key difference. Now Ivanchuk goes for his knight to g6 plan, even preparing to sacrifice these pawns. So knight f4. I've drawn lots of arrows here because there's a lot of pressure actually. There's an immediate threat of rook e7 and queen takes d5 check, winning the rook. So Karpov snaps the pawn materialistically. So knight g6, and we see here a dangerous fawn pawn. Very dangerous now. If white can creep past, black, there'll be dangerous attacking threats. This fawn pawn kind of thing often wins games. Queen f5, and there's menacing threats now. Rook c4 to protect that c8 square. And now Ivanchuk plays a controversial move. He plays g4. And I believe Karpov really blundered here with queen f4. Ivanchuk didn't need to do g4. Maybe rook e6 was strong. I just want to very, very quickly have a look at an example variation. Queen d3 with this idea, this dangerous manoeuvre idea. b3, queen a6 to b7 would be very dangerous. For example, like this. And it will be all over. Because now rook b7. So that shows the danger of this fawn pawn. It's causing damage and a lot of variations. So anyway, Karpov after g4, he played queen f4 and then resigned actually after playing his move. So why did he resign? The key variation is queen takes d5, so threatening queen f7 mate, check, king f1. Now black can't play queen g6 because of queen c4. So, and the checks run out. Say check, king e2, queen g4, and now king d3. The checks would run out. White's threatening all sorts of things. Queen f7 mate, queen d8 mate. So there's no defence here. Black's just busted. Let's have a quick look in overview and summary at this game. So it was seemingly a standard Nimzo Indian Rubenstein variation. Karpov seemed to know what he was doing early on, just isolating White's queen pawn, but then played a kind of routine move which he was severely punished for, this knight d5. So the punishment was this bishop takes d5. And it seemed as though White had a nagging edge. Karpov did seem to invite a threefold repetition at this stage with these knight f5s to e7s all the time. But now Ivanchuk switched to a more aggressive plan of playing queen f3. and he waited for Karpov's f6, but didn't play knight g6 immediately. He waited for this rook to come to sort of materialistically win a pawn over here, because white's rook is also quite aggressively placed, and the combination of this fawn pawn on g6 and white's active rook gives white very menacing threats here. So we see this sequence with g4, and it's difficult for black to do anything in practical terms, but Rybka on shallow depth thinks queen c6, for example, would have been much better than what was played.